Not an aviation expert, so please feel free to add on whatever is relevant. So I'll
is a hot topic in the aviation industry. So how are we going to? We have achieved electric cars. We have achieved propulsion in various other vehicles through electricity. But in aviation, there are a lot of challenges. So this is a NASA research project that's going on in various NASA locations. So that includes Ames as well. So this is regarding an all-electric aircraft and how are we going to apply this technology to other aviation projects in the future. This is a one-off. It's not going to be a commercially produced aircraft or anything. It's just for research. And I gathered as much information as possible through the presentation to the presentations at the Solar System Ambassador Program. So I thought I'll give a heads up. It's an interesting topic. Of course, there are pilots in the room. There are aviation experts in the room. I'm not an aviation expert, so please feel free to add on whatever is relevant. So I'll try to explain to the extent I know. So the big thing in aviation today is like everything is driven by engines that are based on some kind of fuel, right? They are either internal combustion engines, rotary engines, or piston-driven engines. So this technology is tried and tested. Everything works, but it's not exactly 100% efficient. I mean, nothing can be 100% efficient, but the efficiency is really low. So that's one of the reasons why we have to explore other technologies. And what's hot in the Bay Area and the rest of the world right now is electric propulsion, be it on the road or be it in the sky. So this is one of the hot topics. So let me explain what is distributed electric propulsion. So instead of having one source of one propelling source like a propeller or a jet engine, jet engine maybe 2 or 3 or even 4, depends on the aircraft. But here we have multiple different motors and propellers on the wing that is specially designed. So we are distributing it so that we can use power more delinquently when it's needed. In phases like takeoff, for example, you need a lot more power, and then cruise demands a lot lesser power. So if you have distributed propulsion system, it's always easy to control the exact amount of power that's needed for that part of flight. So that's one of the reasons we are moving to distributed electric propulsion. So the term itself refers to a way that electric propulsion can be integrated onto an airplane. So the benefits are twofold. So we have to enhance the inherent benefits and also minimize the inherent shortcomings that are there in the airframe today. So we feel that successful adoption of new propulsion technologies, for that, we have to address the airframe design, we have to address the propulsion system, and also the mission that are going to match these two parameters. So I have a couple of examples here for actually fuel-driven aircraft. So one is the P-59A, the other is the P-63A. If you can see I'm not going to go into the range there. It's just their specifications that's listed. So we'll compare this as we go forward. So this is one of our reference points. So moving on to the next slide, it's talking about the X-57 Maxwell as well. So to begin with, this airframe already exists. So it's one of the most successful twin-engine propeller-driven airframe that exists already. It's called the Tecnem P2006T. So it's an Italian-based airframe. It's manufactured in Italy, and it's like one of the tried and tested reliable twin propeller aircrafts around in the market today. So the reason NASA chose this is because like this can be easily customized. And by tweaking the airframe of the P2060 Tecnem, NASA is trying to demonstrate the X-57 Maxwell design, which is the first all-electric experimental aircraft that the agency has produced. in its Explain series. Explain refers to a series of experimental planes that were designed by NASA for different purposes. For example, in one of my previous presentation, I talked about Quest, which is the supersonic, quite supersonic version um, of the aircraft that's been created by NASA for experimenting as well. So this is one of the explains. It's happened like it's like an ongoing research. One of the latest things that are going on in parallel with Quest as well. So as I said, right, to advance the nation's ability to design, test, and determine airworthiness of a distributed electric and aeropropulsive coupling techniques. It's actually an emerging technology that we have to see how it will evolve in the market scenarios present right now. So the goals here are twofold. So the first one is to design and determine the airworthiness process with regulators. So these are FAA and they directly feeding into the FAR regulations as well. Not only in the US, but then there are other regulators around the world who will catch up if the technology is successful for sure. So the next goal is to establish a platform and a platform for electrical propulsion. So by studying that, you can always get the best practices and you always learn lessons from it. So that's the two goals of it. So NASA is not looking to mass produce this at this point. It's just going to be an experimental aircraft where we can learn a lot of things so that other manufacturers can actually use it in the future. So this is a big project, like it's spread across various NASA locations. So for example, NASA Ames, we are very well known in NASA Ames for our wind tunnels. So aerodynamic analysis is something that's happening here. But there are, as you can see, there are other NASA divisions participating as well. The big one here is the Glenn Research Center, where most of the battery related technology and research is happening. And then Langley and Armstrong have their other facilities where they actually look at the instrumentation part of the aviation as well. And there are other organizations here. The most noted one is in the last below Technam. Technam is the airframe that we're going to use. It's the baseline commercially off the shelf airframe that's available in the market today, as I said. So we are pretty much distributed around the country and even across, I think, even in Italy, so across the globe. So what we are looking at, so the research study so far says that we can achieve 5 times improvement overall. And if you see the efficiency of an internal combustion engine aircraft or a propeller driven aircraft is way in between 30 to 50%. So we are trying to actually increase this to somewhere close to 90% or more than that. And that's where electrical propulsion comes in as well. That's one of the selling points for electrical propulsion. So what we have to see is we have to understand a term called lift to drag ratio here. We are trying to improve that. So in the table and the graph, the black one with dotted is P6000T Technam when it's powered on and it's like the engine is running. And then if you see the X57 mod, you can see there is a 1.5 time difference in terms of efficiency when it comes to both of them. So the table here actually tells you the comparison between the load to drag ratio at around 150 knots true air speed. So we are making sure that we study it at 150 knots true air speed and at a load of I think around 3,000 pounds. So I'll get to that in the next slides. So one of the things we are doing is we are altering the shape of the wing. Everything is the lift part and the drag part are mainly controlled by the shape of the wing. And of course, you can in almost all aircrafts now you can alter the shape of the wing by using the flaps, right? Depending on what part of the flight you are on, whether you are on a landing profile or takeoff profile, or whether you're on the cruise. So basically, that's what we do here as well. We kind of the beauty about lift to drag ratio is directly dependent on the wing. So I will explain that the shape of the wing. So we will explain that in detail in the following slides. So as I said, wings make all the difference. So if you see the airframe that's on the Tecnam P2060, if you see that the area of the wing is like 159 square feet. And we have something called a term that we should understand. It's called wing loading. So in aerodynamics, wing loading is nothing but the total mass of the aircraft divided by the area of its wing. So we can say they're directly related. Consequently, the faster aircraft have higher wing loading than slower aircraft, which means that's why you see in jet engine aircrafts, the wing is more swept. In slower aircrafts like what we use in our CAP C182, for example, they have straight wings with a sweeping angle of almost zero. That's one of the wing loading parameters as well. And so the point is we have to increase wing loading to achieve efficiency and weight distribution as well. But unfortunately, we cannot change the shape of the wing as it is. Like it will compromise other things. So it will really impact your takeoff distance, for example, your runway length, landing distances as well. So it's not straightforward. So that's why we have to couple this with distributed propulsion as well, which I will dwell on in the next slides. So the impact of doing this is fivefold. So the first one is large reduction in wing area can give you better efficiency, and also it decreases the drag, the friction drag during all phases of flight, and it allows cruise at a high lift coefficient. Higher the lift coefficient, it's better the shorter distance you require on the runway to actually take off. So that's a good thing. If you see the NASA's DEP wing, which is the research wing that NASA has developed through some NACA standard, is actually very thin. And in terms of area, it's only 66, 67 square feet. And if you see, it has got a lot more wing loading at 45 pounds per square feet. So this determines the higher coefficient of lift as well. So you have a coefficient of lift of greater than 4. But this coefficient of lift is also determined by what kind of propulsion mechanism you have on the wing. So if you want to achieve the same lift with a shorter wing, you need more speed, right? So you need more power. So we have to match the airframes, the Tecnam airframes takeoff and landing speed. So we have to modify our wing loading accordingly. So what NASA has done is they have actually broken this into several phases. They call it crawl, walk, and run. So you see that there are different mods here: mod 1, mod 2, mod 3, and mod 4 for X57. So we start with mod 1 to collect data. So this is going to be with the Tecnam profile. So nothing is changed here. It still runs on fuel. It still runs. The wing does carry the fuel here. Nothing is changing. It's just the stock aircraft from Tecnam. We are going to fly that and take as much baseline data as possible. Moving on to mod 2. Mod 2 is also relatively close to mod 1, but the only difference here is we replace the fuel-driven propeller engines with motor-driven engines, and we collect data for that as well. That is another baseline for electric-driven propulsion. But this is again not efficient at this point because we have not customized the aircraft totally for efficiency. So that's where mod 3 comes in. Mod 3 is where we have independent propellers assigned underneath the wing. At this point, the wing is changed as well. So And what can you see in Mod 3 is the same electric motors are actually installed on the tips of the wing rather than the internal part of the wing. And that gives you one set of data as well. So finally, what we do is we try to get to Mod 4, which is close to what we are expecting in terms of our research. So our research culminates at Mod 4. So what happens here is we have distributed propulsion systems that are outside, and they rotate as and when power is needed during a phase. And so that's the four mods that are four phases rather for Maxwell 57. So this slide talks about the motivation. So there are a lot of barriers in electric propulsion. It's not easy. It's not like just installing a motor to a wheel in terms of a Tesla car, for example. The challenge is much more. We have to see the battery density as well, and it's very easy to deplete the battery in mid-air because of the battery density. You either require you have to fight with mass, you have to fight with energy density as well. So choosing something that's going to be optimum is a really tough research that's going on right now. So we have, as I said, we have weight, safety, and flight environment challenges, which complicate our battery design, especially when we are using COTS technologies, that is commercially over-the-shelf available technologies. So what we need is we need a high voltage lithium battery series of it with intrinsic propagation prevention and passive thermal management. I'll tell you why these two things are really important, because this is as opposed to a car, this is going to be on a flight, on an airplane. So we cannot accept any kind of explosion or fire that's going to occur in the battery because of its thermal properties or other things like short circuits or other things, other electrical phenomena that happen around the batteries. So even if something deforms in the battery side, we have to make sure that we contain it within the shell, and it's not going to propagate all through the aircraft. So that's another thing. We have to establish motor, inverter, ground as well during the flight test program. So that is to make sure that we don't have any leakage current coming around. Excuse me. So the other thing is we have to design the crew interface. For example, we have our G1000 systems where we can see the status of our engine, for example, in our G1000 system. So here we don't have an engine right in Mod 4. We have to make sure that we monitor all the voltage and the current levels and the power levels that are coming from the battery and the health status of the battery and so on. So NASA is working on something on an interface that's going to display that to the flight crew in the cockpit, to the pilot and the person or the observer in our case on the other seat. So typically, I think this will come integrated to G1000 at some point, but we are not using G1000 here. It's some other system. Pathfinder for traction system standards is something which we are looking at. So we always learn lessons to inform this to establish regulations around for the FAR and the regulators. And we also have to do a risk assessment on electrifying the aircraft, especially for Mod 3 and Mod 4. So extensive testing is required on a configuration that's proven. So all in all, it's it's imperative that beyond development, we have to do a lot of design analysis and tests to fly the electric aircraft. And that's what the data is what we're looking at. So I had briefly touched upon it in my previous slides, but the cruise motor has a lot of challenges that we have to address as well. So we have to look at design standards for electrical propulsion. So we don't have one established right now. So we don't have a sourced electric motor that is already there in the market right now, which can be put in. So we have to design it from scratch. So we have to develop this motor from scratch. So we have to design it and we have to test it as well. We anticipate it's going to be a dual winding motor architecture for aerospace applications. So we have to make sure that this motor mitigates the effects of components failures. So we do require extensive validation as well. And for the testing standards, X57 developed an electric motor testing approach. So again, we document everything in our lessons learned. And also there's a testing standard for called ASTM F39.45. So coming with testing, testing is just a one point. What happens after deployment? We have to even maintain it, right? So we have to maintain the standards for electric propulsion for X57. That's something we have to take care as well. So this aircraft is going to be, even after it's been deployed, we continuously keep studying it so that we can establish the maintenance standards as well. So the flight motor is, as you can see, it's already in Rev K, which means a lot of design has occurred from the scratch. Like it's the prototype is evolving, and we have the 11th major design iteration as of now. So we have to cool the electric motors as well. So we are using passively cooled technologies like air cooling for the motors right now, and we are studying that one. The data we observe from that too in terms of heat management. So performance of the motor, efficiency and torque are difficult to capture due to electromagnetic interference and high frequencies being present in the data. So we have to make sure that we shield that. Of course, coming to motors, although it's simpler than an internal combustion engine, it's still a laborious process in terms of winding and getting the stator and the rotor in place. The magnetic fields that are going to be the motor, they're all very challenging things that we have to address. So this typically, I'm not sure what kind of motors they're going to use. I think they're going to be like some kind of DC series motors or kind of some kind of motors that are high speed. So so I'm not really sure on that point, but I can elaborate it as I get more data in other presentations. So what we have right now is we have a test program already identified. We are taking analysis readings and revving our systems constantly.
Kailash, can you just go back a slide just a moment?
Sure.
I just really have to appreciate the caption on that second photo there. Self-induced vibration exposes insulation overstress areas efficiently, which is pretty much NASA speak for the damn thing shook itself apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like
sure.
that.
Thanks for highlighting that. I did not go over that, but yeah, I thought that those were very specific to motors and windings. So so yeah, thanks. Good that you brought it up. Thank you. So we have to have a motor controller as well for driving these motors at different speeds according to the profile of the aircraft. Electric aircraft operation requires high efficiency power conversion from the battery to the motor. So we kind of have to have a very capable motor controller to do this. Again, we have technical challenges in this. What kind of technology we use? One of them is using a silicon carbide based MOSFET, which is nothing but a switch. It's a high speed switch that's going to change the power levels to the motor so that the speed can be controlled. And then the next one is, of course, the cooling. So cooling is something which we have to address. At this point, we are looking at passive cooling, but we have to see how it proceeds. Then we have a safety critical software that controls all these things. That's again, software has been our pain points in NASA missions, especially with Boeing, right? Software has been a issue to not skirt over. So it's completely powered by electric motors and they are controlled by a software. So extensive testing is needed at this point as well. So what we are looking at is, again, very, very important thing in aviation, redundancy. So how are we going to achieve redundancy here? So I'll come to that. I have a separate slide on that. So just a food for thought at this point, we need redundancy for everything. That's how we do things in aviation. This slide talks about the challenges in manufacturing and testing. So manufacturing challenges, as I told you, few COTS components. The airframe itself is a COTS component, but then several other things are not. We have coupled to that, we have long component lead times due to high demand and limited productions. Of course, there are subcontractors. The scale of the project is like that. If not everything can be done within NASA in-house, so they have to port so many other. The supply chain comes into play as well. So NASA engineers and aircraft electronic technicians and contractors are working to bring this project to life. So there are, again, this is not going to be done in one iteration. It's going to, like, we have to build the data and test it over several iterations to achieve it. Other testing challenges, again, prototypes. We have to manage our risks. So in early iterations, you have more risks. So we have to develop a risk reduction testing framework. And also in flight leg testing, it's difficult to achieve because we have high power requirements here for motors. So some of them we are doing it at a laboratory level. For example, the wind tunnels at Ames is one thing which we are doing in-house. Even before we get to wind tunnels, NASA has a lot of software to actually see how the profile of the wing can be changed and how the aerodynamics can be changed to achieve flow over the wing, airflow over the wing. And then there is a Yarrow test stand, which is exactly to test the lab and ground testing in terms of the battery itself. Of course, the one that I've touched is the software. So due to the COTS nature of the core controller, it is very complicated and we require extensive testing. So the two figures there shows that in initial iterations, the MOSFET body was catastrophically failed due to excess current, heat or voltage vibration. So that's analysis of what. So these are our learnings in our projects. So we have to keep iterating it with better design and better specifications going forward. The first one shows the PCB having some kind of arcing. So these cannot occur during flight. So if these things occur and you have no power, you literally can't glide like a conventional aircraft, because we've changed the wing profile so much that without power, I don't think you will be able to sustain the flight and glide to a nearest airport. So some things which we are doing right now are much more safer, tried and tested, but this is something which we are going to achieve in the future. It kind of presents other challenges as well. So this is the main thing, the flight batteries, the testing challenges and the technical challenges. So as I said, the number one challenge is we don't have a commercial solution yet for battery systems. So we don't have a stock battery like what we have for the Tesla cars. Even Tesla took several years to actually come up with one, right? So yeah, battery technology is something which is evolving day by day, and the learning curve there is pretty huge. So what happens when we consider a battery for a aircraft or airframe? So we require high power requirements with flight weight limitation. So we have to achieve 461 volts at 41 kilowatt hours effective capacity, and at least supporting a load of 859 pounds. That's 16 modules and 51 pounds each. So there are 16 battery modules which you are looking at. So aircraft propulsion requirements drive design solutions to a higher voltage and current rather than the comparative automotive or auxiliary aircraft operations. So as I said, right, the profile for aircraft is going to be way different than an automotive. We are looking at an industry target of 30% packaging overhead that aligns with the budget. The other thing we have to look at is the thermal runaway aspect of the battery. So thermal management is has to be looked at as a critical design driver for X57. So we have to make sure that the batteries are cooled, the motors are cooled as well. So if we don't cool it, there is a chance for thermal runaway, and there's a chance of a fire hazard that's going to happen in the during flight. And for that purpose, we have to monitor that using a software and a control system. So again, the problem here is we don't have high density battery packs right now to prevent thermal runaway propagation. That's one of our main challenges in X57 battery design. So the original X57 battery design actually failed to contain a failure propagation test in December 2016. So this is one of the elements that we have to address. Our success with replacing fuel cells with, two propulsion engines has always been a challenge, right? We have always, even in 787, we had some fires due to the fuel cells that were actually used in place of the AP. That's the auxiliary power unit. So using a battery will also present similar challenges. So this is what has occurred during the first propagation test that was conducted. So they had to completely redesign the battery system to contain single cell failures, as I said. So a fire can happen, but you have to consider it within the case of the battery itself and make sure that it doesn't propagate anywhere outside to another cell or to other parts of the aircraft. Extensive module system testing is required here as well. So that's the standard there. You have to achieve ASTM F39.4. So what started as an original approach was inadequate, so we had to move on. So the major lessons learned there was in the aviation battery development. So, for example, use of lighter, more energetic cells can pose greater safety risks. Cooling of cells while minimizing cell-to-cell propagation is also a risk. So containment of gases, that's another safety hazard here. That, and then thermal management and containment. And for eVTOL target, that's the vertical takeoff and landing target of 30%. To achieve that, 30% packaging overhead is achievable, and it's demonstrated on the X57 as well. So X57 is not a VTOL aircraft, but we are trying to build in some capability where we can match some kind of profile for VTOL. This is the one of the testing where the destructive testing was carried out in the airframe, and as you can see, the fire again. This is I don't think this is acceptable. The fire is actually visible outside the cell. So based on the learnings of what we had originally, so we are now zeroed in on what we require for our battery. So we are looking at 461 volts, 47 kilowatt hour effective capacity. We are looking at a total weight of 860 pounds for 16 modules at 51 pounds each. So we are looking at 2 packs of batteries that supports the traction system. So again, I talked about redundancy. So we need 2 packs that are completely isolated from each other. So if one fails, we can always feed on the other. So the initial destructive testing, as I showed, was conducted in 2016, December. And we did multiple iterations of redesign in NASA for using the guidelines. So again, the set number 2 qualification acceptance testing was done in 2019. So you can see the individual units here in the diagram, and you can see where these battery packs sit as well. So the cutaway section actually shows you the battery installation that's going to happen in the experimental prototype. So you can see almost half the fuselage is just batteries at this point. So this is the test on the thermal runaway condition without propagation. So this is actually a video, and there's a link. You can always refer to it at a later stage. And I was talking about redundancy. So the main thing here is how we are going to achieve redundancy is to have two set of battery packs, a battery pack A and a battery pack B. The total thing is called the main battery system. So the aircraft can be driven by either one of the battery pack working at the same time. So it will give you enough flight control power to actually glide down in case the other battery pack fails. One thing we have to address here is these two battery packs are in close proximity. So if one goes on fire, we have to make sure that the other one doesn't catch up with any other safety hazard. So this is the electrical diagram. I'll leave it to you to actually see it at a later point. So this one I had briefly touched upon as well. This is a system that's like going to finally tie up with our G1000. So basically, they have their own UI to see data of the batteries. So they have a CAN bus, which is nothing but a controller area network. So that's the network within the aircraft to actually collect data. It's pretty similar to what we have in cars as well. So in cars also, in automobiles, we use controller area network as well to get the data from various embedded components. So typically data is fed from we can read data from the motor controllers, the battery management system, the throttle encoders as well. So the MFD provides non-safety critical situational awareness for the pilot. So here we have to, situational awareness is also relevant to the health status of our batteries and motors. So in addition to whatever situational awareness we are taking care as a pilot in our flights, for example. So this is an opportunity for the industry to come together and establish a standard. So we don't have something like this in the industry right now. So if the scan can be further enhanced into another network or a standard, which can be used in electric aircraft. So that's something we are looking at as well. So these are some pictures from the Mod 2 vehicle integration. So as you can see in the Mod 2, there are different sensors that are being installed. So we have strain gauges, accelerometers, air data probes. Of course, there are modifications to the cockpit because we need a digital display to see battery performance and the controller performances, and then throttles as well. And then in Mod 2, we have the motors installed. These are the main two motors, the bigger ones. And then you can see some pictures of the throttle as well. So we're trying to keep it the same way as our traditional aircraft feeding in the throttle. But only thing is this time we're going to control the speed of the electric motor. And as I said, this slide sums it up. Basically, we are looking at lessons learned and how we are going to use the data in the future. So that's about this slide. Like this table talks about the FAR standard it ties to and what kind of lessons we are going to learn in terms of aircraft performance, motors, batteries, and certification. So for the Mod 3 and 4, we are looking at the following motivations. We are trying to leverage distributed electric propulsion. So the first point is mature distribution electric propulsion system architecture. So NASA will tackle the technical challenges of operating multiple motors with the industry standards that are there today. So try to match them as close as possible. So validate higher power electric propulsion system operation. So we are looking at 120 kilowatts in Mod 2 and 250 kilowatts in Mod 4. So these are, I'm talking about the power distribution to the individual small propellers that are there in the center. And then we are looking at exploration of novel optimized configuration enabled by DEP, thin haul and large scale. So exploration of wind tip propulsion vortex interaction. For example, we have the vortex on the tip of the wing, right? So that's one of the reasons why we push the main two propellers to the edge of the wing to minimize the vortex. So they believe it's pretty similar to what we do in our modern aircraft, right? We have our wing shape. We have a slit at the end of the wing to actually minimize the vortex, so that we don't have the vortex created during flight. That's one of the designs. That's the reasons why we push our main propellers to the extremities of the wing. And then we have to optimize our cruise wing capability as well. So these are achieved by high performance, high aspect wing ratios, which I've already covered, using a wing material structure that is different to what is there presently. So we are looking at composites as well for wing. So the goal is to actually come up with a 500% improvement in energy consumption at cruise. So that's our main goal, right? So significant portion of your flight is going to be in cruise. Your takeoff and landing are going to take up some aspects of the flight, but depending on the distance you're going to travel, cruise is going to dominate. So that's where you're looking at maximum efficiency improvement. And we're looking at zero in-flight carbon emissions because we are using batteries in terms of fuel. So there is a long way. I mean, we achieve a lot of carbon emission, zero carbon emission standard by adopting a battery-based approach. And the third point, which I've not touched, is noise reduction. So airport noise is becoming a significant factor now, as we are all aware. So one of the things that Reed Hillview is going through at this point as well. So that's something we have to address, and it's always a good thing to reduce noise so that we don't bother the population around the airport. So the Mod 3 wing design basically is evolving over the on the Mod 2 design. So here we are looking at composite wing fabricated in California. So that's going to happen in Glen, I think. Also, the wind tunnel analysis and stuff like that is going to happen in NASA Ames. Single continuous main spar carries normal and axial loads. So this is again based on the shear and bending of the wing. So they're shaping it accordingly. Again, they're talking about the working skin, the front and the rear spares for external loads. Also, the image below is the isostatic attachment to the fuselage, how we are going to attach this wing to the fuselage. So we have to take care of how much weight bearing capacity is there in the wing as well. Of course, the wing will have an aileron, flap, everything, and nacelle interface. The nacelle interface is nothing but the small propellers you can see in the bottom of the wing. And they can be deployed as and when needed, when power is needed and power is not needed. Of course, we cannot do everything in the runway and actually fly in our initial stage of research. We need a simulation software with flight controls. So that's something AFRC is doing as well, to give lots of data from a simulation perspective. So this includes, of course, the failure scenario modeling. Suppose what happens if the power goes out on one of the motors or the battery fails. So the next slide is how are we going to achieve lift using a distributed electric propulsion system. So the high lift propellers designed very differently from traditional propellers. So uniform velocity profile versus most efficient thrust velocity profile is something we have to look at. So these motors here, the high lift nacelles, there are the small things that are attached to the bottom of the wing. So they come into play only during the aspects of flight where we require more power, for example, takeoff. So that's when they come on. And we have a number of different small propellers here underneath the wings. We can fine tune the amount of power we really require at different phases of flight. So it really again, these things again comes in the research of the flight profile itself. So these are the designs that are going on right now for the high lift nacelle. So what will our Mod 4 walk around look like? So the first one on the left is the landing configuration, where we have all the small propellers deployed as well, along with the main propellers. And then one on the right, during cruise, you don't need the small propellers because you don't need that much power. So that's the reason if you see like all the small propellers are stored underneath and we're not using it. So during cruise, we anticipate that we only need a lesser power. So we can achieve this by our wingtip cruise motors, each by providing 95 HP and 80 HP max continuous. And these propellers are 5 feet in diameter. So we anticipate that's enough for a cruise flight in terms of power. So what happens during landing or just before landing? If we deploy flaps, again, you're going to slow the aircraft down. To basically achieve this, you need some distribution propulsion system to have the same effect as well, because the area is again not huge. To compensate for that, you need additional power. And that's how the small propellers will come into play there as well. And yeah, as I said, in cruise, they are stored. They are not used. So in the Tecnam P2060, these are the parameters that are existing. So we have considered a research based on 3,000 pound gross weight. This wingspan is again going to remain the same. It's going to be 32.8 feet in span, and we have 36.6 feet between the propellers, the main propellers. We are looking at a cruise speed of 150 knots, a true air speed at 8,000 feet MSL. And we are looking at a stall speed of 58 and a max flight speed of 167 at a ceiling of 50,000 feet. And these are the standards that are going to get updated based on electric flight. So the FARs are going to get updated based on this research. So it's going to be pretty, I think it's going to be, the inputs are going to be pretty large once we get to electrical propulsion as well. As you can see, the number of standards and the CFRs that are going to be impacted. So we have this link here for further reading. If you want any further reading on technical papers and where the design exactly is at this point, you can always go to this link here and get the data. So with that, I come to the end. Thank you very much for the opportunity for presenting. So I'm open to questions, but there are people in the room who are better equipped to answer as well. Having said that.
Hey, thanks, Obviously.
I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the difference between the propellers on these electric craft and standard, more typical propeller for flight. What are the differences that had to be incorporated?
Basically, the way the propeller is driven is completely different, right? So we are using traction motors in terms of an all-electric aircraft, and we're using an internal combustion engine or a similar system in terms of a fuel-driven aircraft. So one is basically mechanical, the other is purely electrical. So there are two different systems with two different challenges to address. And yeah, if you see our mechanical engine-driven propellers, they have to be coupled to an alternator to get electrical power out. We need magnetos and stuff. So if we are switching to a completely electric aircraft, I think these systems will get redundant. If I'm not correct, I'm correct. Sorry. So they're completely different designs. Of course, pilots in the room, they're more than welcome because they know their systems on the back of their hand, and they can relate to what's going to happen in the electrical based system as well. So more than open to comment.
Well, it seems like one of the biggest differences is the fact that effectively when you're feathering the props, the propellers for the inner motors that are on the wing itself, not the
high lift motors.
Yeah, the high lift motors. Thank you.
Yeah.
When those feather, it actually basically pulls the blades into the aircraft as opposed to just turning them directly into the flight path. So it's actually more efficient in that sense than feathering.
But that does
Yeah,
not,
so-
does not state any change in the design of the propeller itself, just in the mechanism that operates it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think-
That the blades were completely different. I didn't understand how that would make any difference.
well, I think they're trying to just tune the blades because with every propeller design you have, there's a different performance characteristic. Because a propeller is a wing, right? It just happens to be a wing turned sideways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by not having it stored, I think we are inducing more drag into the aircraft. So that's the reason we are storing the blades.
Oh yeah. So in that case, stowing the props on the high lift engine is purely to reduce induced drag.
Yeah.
No, but I think that to Silverstein's point, I think he's asking about the actual changes to the blades themselves.
Are they more twisted? Are they slimmer?
So it sounds like they're exploring multiple different blade configurations because again, since you have the high lift, especially if you have the high lift motors operating basically when you require a high lift regime, takeoff, landing kind of thing, they will probably need they're going to be operating at a completely different speed regime. It's going to be operating at different requirements for power delivery, as opposed to the two blades on the tips, which will be basically your cruise motors, which will obviously need to operate in the higher speed
It
regimes.
still sounds like nothing outside the realm of what a standard prop can do.
It sounds I think it sounds like they're just trying different techniques of tuning the prop exactly, or the props plural.
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to do research on my own, I guess.
Okay.
The answers I need.
So the one question I was going to have is obviously there are companies who work in electric aircraft right now. Pipistrel comes to mind, and I forgot the company's name, but the aircraft itself is the Electra. It's an Israeli. It's from an
Joby Aviation is something. It's I think California-based company as well. Joby Aviation. They are into.
Joby's also working on the autonomous aircraft stuff as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, considering that there are companies who are either retrofitting existing designs for electric, to be electric, or creating brand new designs for electric, how much is NASA working kind of in cooperation with them, and how much is in competition with them? Because obviously NASA's got a government budget, which is basically nothing.
So in terms of, I can answer in terms of competition, we don't have much at this point because NASA is more studying the research side of it, so that the best practices of it can be taken over by the manufacturing guys in the future. So there is no competition in terms of revenue here, just data that is going to come up. This data is going to be used by other manufacturers in the future. So they're trying to leverage as much costs as possible, but as you can see, the enormity and the scale of the project, not everything can be caught. So you have to design something in-house.
Yeah.
So all of the information is going to be released to the public to do with whatever they want with it? Or is any of it going to be withheld by NASA?
It should be public release. I mean, NASA's a
Yeah,
federal agency working on federally funded missions, which means taxpayer, aka it's our research.
Again, this X-57 is not going to be a commercial aircraft. It's not going to be a commercial released aircraft. It's going to be an explain that's going to feed in data to other manufacturers in the future. That's what NASA has already done.
So I'm not talking about right now, but in the future, it's going to become public domain, or is it going to be still patented by NASA or something, released to the public?
Legally, as a product of the federal government, it's not subject to any sort of copyright.
Yeah.
So it should end up becoming public domain.
Unless it's a national security reason for it not to be.
No, the very purpose NASA is doing it is because we have to get into this territory at some point. Manufacturers have to pick it up. So we need some kind of baseline data for it. So it's one of the reasons why Explain program is developed.
So just to kickstart the manufacturers, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there should be some takers based on some set of baseline data that this can be achieved at an efficiency that that the research is promising.
I'm curious if they're doing, or if they have done any sort of research into whether at least leaving those high lift propellers partially open to wind flow in order to create some sort of regenerative charging effect, or if the drag caused by those would overrule any sort of efficiencies in that
You'll
regard.
never get 100% back.
Never get 100%, but is there a point where it would end up causing slightly more?
Yeah, is
You
the
lose more because Archimedes principle.
But
well, no, but no, I guess the question is would the increase in the induced drag expend more energy than you would reclaim through the regen?
Basically,
90% always.
Always.
You'll never get back more energy than you
No.
put in, otherwise you've invented a perpetual.
No. Well, I mean that's true. I mean, but regen braking in a car, right? If I'm driving an electric car and I take my foot off the gas and the regen braking kicks in, you're not going to get 100%. You're not going to recharge your battery to 100%, but you're going to put a little bit of charge in the battery, which will extend the life a little bit.
Maybe,
I'm
but only
thinking-
on landing.
I'm thinking less during cruise and more during a descent.
Maybe during a descent.
Oh, like yeah, so throw the flight idle, put it to flight idle, and basically have a cruise in on regen.
But then if you're landing anyway, why do you need to?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So there's less, so you have less energy to recharge, or less energy you have to recharge once you get to taxi.
Yeah.
A little bit back, whether it be worth the cost of development, who knows?
Every kilowatt.
So the local flight school, I was chatting with the owner, and they were talking about, because obviously with Reed Hillview and the leaded gas situation, they've obviously switched unleaded gas at this point, but asking about electric, and they've been checking out electric aircraft, and the biggest issue they have right now with the electric aircraft is you have to have the charging infrastructure at whatever field you wind up landing at, and right now all these companies have proprietary charging systems. And so, because putting obviously a charger on board all the charging infrastructure on board the airplane just adds extra weight to the airplane and buys you nothing. So that's going to be an interesting thing. Hopefully there's something that comes out of it. It's like a universal charger, so you can rock up to a self-service pump like you can for
I
gas.
guess what you're more likely to see, especially in remote places, is a mobile charger of some sort, like a truck that has a charging unit built into it.
Yeah.
That can go to the airport and charge the plane.
Yeah, but the reason right now, the reason why the electric aircraft work for flight school is partially because the length of time these things fly for is about the same amount of time as a typical flight lesson. Is also the fact that most flight schools wind up landing back at the airport they started. You go out, go to the practice area, and then come right back, so you don't need to worry about transporting charging infrastructure. It's going to be interesting.
If they make a standardized connection for aircraft and do not call it Jet E, I will riot.
Jet E, that'd be
Yes.
fun. Okay. Or
As opposed to Jet A.
yeah. Or EL 90, EL 100 or 100 EL.
It doesn't quite roll off the
No,
tongue
it doesn't
as
roll
well.
off the tongue.
Maybe have the standard NATO plane ready. Just connect to that.
Well, yeah, just plug into a Tesla supercharger, rock up
Let's
to
do
a
it
Tesla
along with
supercharger.
alligator clips, personally.
That'd be fun. Why did your plane short circuit? I touched the red to the black and the black to the red. Tree.
I have a question about the simulator. How accurate is that thing to the real airplane? Because the airplane is obviously in a developmental stage, so they don't have enough data about its flight characteristic. So and now they have a flight simulator. So how accurate is that flight simulator?
I don't think they know yet because they haven't built a full one to fly yet.
They did have.
They haven't had a Mod 4 fly yet.
Yeah.
They're supposed to do that next year.
Any flight simulation you have now is going to be purely speculative.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just use the data off the scale model and the characteristics off of that to kind of figure out ballpark what parameters to set the simulator to. And then I think they're just, it's a close approximation.
That makes sense.
Yeah, this is why all test pilots, when they get, whether it's a small airplane or a Boeing wide body, they all go out wearing their parachutes and they have the escape hatch because when they first step on the plane, they have no idea if it's going to perform up to the paper spec. So, okay. Thank you, Lieutenant. So that was very informative. Definitely an interesting future we live in, both in terms of electrification of of all modes of transportation. Cars being obviously the most common that we know of, but electric boats, electric aircraft, and alternate fuel aircrafts as well in general. So thank you very much for presenting that.
What a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive.